There are thousands of ways to teach a retrieve, and I wanted to show you one that is very often my favourite. It does depend on a dog having one foundation behaviour, which is a nose target, where they target their nose to your hand, although this doesn't need to be sustained, so a nose boop will suffice here. If you haven't got that all-important nose boop, then please see the video in the link, and Nando's going to explain to you how you can train your dog to do that. I love this method for dogs that aren't quite so toy motivated, or for dogs that really struggle with two-player games and would rather dissect things or just possess them alone, as each part of this process teaches them real core sentiments. For example, that it's safe to hold an item close to a human, or that moving towards a person with an item in their mouth can have benefits for them. And these things are real principles of teaching a dog to be happier with their items around their people. So this method that I'm going to explain today is called back chaining, because it's taught in sections in the opposite order to which they play out in reality, so backwards. So to retrieve, the dog needs to run out, pick up an item, turn, carry it back to you, and then one way or another put it in your hand. But in this method, we teach it backwards, and we tack each part to the next in a chain. So the hold is taught first, and then hold and give, and then carry, hold and give, then pick up, carry, hold and give, and then pick up, turn, hold and give, and then lastly, run out, pick up, turn, hold and give. I'm training today for my scent work retrieve, specifically active indication in World Scent Dog Association competitions, where the speed your dog can bring the item back to your hand after finding it is imperative, but the position they take is not. If you want to use this method for a more formal retrieve with a present position or maybe a heel and hold, then I would add these positions in as a sort of part 1B after teaching your dog to hold an item and before the hold and touch. I'd also suggest working on those particular positions so totally separate to your hold, so that they're strong and on cue without the hold before you then add them to part of your process. Then present the item to your dog to hold and cue the position with the hold, starting right from the beginning, that if he drops the item, so start from the beginning of the process, each repetition, if he drops the item during the process. And maybe even going back and teaching him to hold and do something else easy as a concept if the dog really struggles, and the dog can then take the position with the item in their mouth. We're also using a method that can become a generalised process here, and we've spoken about that quite a lot on this course, so that you can use it in the future to train the dog to pick up and hold anything and retrieve anything in a way that they'll really easily understand. My item isn't going to be scented here though, and you'll see that I'm wearing no gloves. When we're first teaching a dog to retrieve and they find it difficult to play or to not possess the item, then there's usually some complex emotional response that we're going to have to change and work through during this process. And we don't want to condition those complex emotional responses to our active scent, unlike using play when the dogs love to play, which obviously conditions a brilliant emotional response. Additionally, because we're going to use so much food here, contamination of a much more salient scent, food, before building enough saliency in the catnip scent can become a real issue if we try and use catnip scented items when we're back chaining like this. Lastly, real quick note, I'm going to use an item that my dog will likely want to hold in his mouth, and ideally something that he hasn't had as a toy before. For many dogs, paint rollers give us the absolute best start because they're light, they're easy to work with, they're a nice shape and texture for the dog to have in their mouth. And for a dog that really needs that extra boost, you can even get them fluffy. So, number 1, hold. The first behaviour we're building is a hold. We're going to use shaping here, where we mark and reward increments of behaviour and increase what we expect from the dog as we move towards the goal. With many dogs, we can simply capture a lot of this behaviour if we're lucky, and if we've got a dog, if we're training a dog that likes to bite. Although if that is the case, you might find it easier to use play to build your retrieve instead. So, I'm going to show you with Khaleesi, who is a rescue Malinois who's not got any retrieve or hold at all, so that you can see a realistic first session. To begin, I'm going to use a marker. I'm going to use a verbal marker, which is the word yes, whenever she does exactly what I want, and follow that up with a treat. I'll lightly get her to repeat each behaviour for a number of repetitions until I'm certain that she knows that that is what I want her to do, and that's what she needs to do in order to earn her treat. The best sign of that is that the dog very quickly shows that behaviour and doesn't try anything else in their repertoire each time that the item is presented towards them. My steps for shaping are usually contact with the item with any part of their face first, then contact with the mouth, then contact with the teeth, then mouth open contact, then item in mouth, then the weight of item momentarily in the mouth, then the weight of item whilst my hands are moved and then returned, and then for the dog to hold the item whilst I do jazz fingers, and then hold the item while I do jazz hands, and then hold the item while I've got food next to it, and then hold the item while I drop food next to them. You can get a decent retrieve without having really practiced distractions and proofed your hold. And you can add the hand touch as soon as the dog can hold the item in their mouth whilst you move your hands and return them. But I would suggest that you continue working on this and get to the end of that list simultaneously whilst you're working on the other aspects of your whole retrieve process. That stands for all of the different parts of this process. I'll continue to polish and proof the various parts separately and work on little exercises that practice, for example, the turns in isolation or just the pickups to get them really, really strong when they're then in that whole process, even if that whole process already exists. So let's see my first ever session with Khaleesi, and then let's see a much more advanced session whilst I'm adding distractions with Blake holding something.
Yes. Good girl. Yes. 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 Good girl, well done. Yes. 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 Slimy treats. Ready? Yes. 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 Hold. Hold.
Number 2, hold and give. So I'm assuming your dog will do a hand target on cue now, and we know that your dog can hold because you've just completed the first step. So now comes putting these two things together. My aim is to get pressure with this. I want my dog to push the thing into my hand. I'm not content with him just placing it in my hand, or worse still, I see people fumbling to catch the item as the dog drops it towards them. I'm a dropsy at the best of times, so it's really important for me that my dog pushes it into my hand. So I'm going to shape this too in the following steps. And if you watch the session I'm going to show you with Archie, my possessive pit bull, you'll notice that I'm going to work through this in a corner so that he has less of an ability to turn and just F off with the item. It also means he has to turn and orientate towards me. Now, the other thing about doing this with a more possessive dog is that I'm going to let him retake the item and pick it up from the floor each time when he drops it. Now, this isn't perfect practice for the process at large, and if you see here with Blake, that I'd rather actually practice like this and represent the item to the dog each time to keep it really clean. But with a more possessive dog, you can start to become the enemy if in every rep you're taking the thing away from the dog each time, and it can just turn into a fight and they can start not enjoying the process. So, my steps for marking this are: hold and move towards me. Hold and come within reaching distance of me. I might even put a marker on the wall. Hold and then do a hand touch, even if the item isn't still remaining in the dog's mouth. Hold and then touch with the item remaining in the dog's mouth. And the hand presentation here will be contingent on the dog having the item in their mouth. Note that with all the possessive dogs, I'll allow them to drop the item without me grabbing hold of it, and then I'll give it a kick for them to start again, and then hold and give it to me while I take it. At this point, I'll start moving backwards to get speed and a little bit more desire for pressure. And then I'm going to start marking that pressure, and eventually only marking when the pressure is so sufficient that I can very easily take the item.
Yes. 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 Good boy. Well done. Get it. Touch. Yes. Good boy. Get it. Touch. Yes. Good boy. Get it. Touch. Yes. Good boy. Well done. Oh, he's so clever. Good boy. Ready? Get it. Touch. Yes. Good boy. Get it. Yes. Well done. Well done. Good boy. Yes. Good boy. Well done. Yes. Well done. Good lad. Oh, he's so clever. Oh, he's so clever. Oh, get it. Yes. Well done. Good boy. What's this? Nice work. Yes, nice work, good boy. Yes, what a clever boy.
Pick up and carry. For dogs who are not at all possessive and would rather not carry the item at all, I would use this kind of similar process to the possession above, but between each repetition I'm going to give the dog the item as opposed to getting them to pick it up off the floor. Then, as soon as I've given it to them, I'm going to start immediately moving backwards and inviting them with my hand, marking using the same steps as for the possessive dog above, and then tacking on them, giving it to my hand at the very end when the carrying is super strong. If the dog drops prematurely, then I'll stop and I'll pick the item up and start again, but this time expect a little bit more distance. The pick up and give needs to both be really strong before we can add that to this carrying picture.
Yes. Yes. Good girl, much nicer. Yes.
So getting the dog to pick up from the ground can sometimes require a whole little shaping session of its own. I'll use similar steps to when I was teaching my dog to hold, and I'll tack on the rest of the process when the dog is nailing it. So I'll start with any contact on the item on the floor and then move on to mouth contact and then open mouth. A great tip to keep your criteria perfectly when it comes to lifting is to put masking tape on the wall so that you can really see how far your dog is lifting the object as your particular criteria. If you really struggle with this step, then you can check out the other link in the description below. So, once the dog has the item in her mouth, I'll go for a partial lift and then a full lift where the item doesn't touch the floor. And then above marker 1, above marker 2, above marker 3, and then above marker 3 and 1 step towards me, and then 2 steps and then 3 steps. At this point, I'm going to start putting a cone on the floor and putting the dog in a sit and using those cones so that the dog is picking up and moving it past the cone, rewarding first at cone 1, cone 2, and then cone 3. And finally tacking on that hold and give part with the pressure. Some people believe that it's clearest for the dog if during these phases the dog is never rewarded if the item touches the floor. And that you should always go in and hold your hand to catch the item so that the dog learns that unless the item is in your hand, they don't get the treat. And you make it impossible for the dog to actually drop the item on the floor at the initial stages of the process. I think that it's true for some dogs, and some dogs do find this clearer. Also, some dogs, especially if you're inside, find the falling and the noise of the object falling startling, and this can definitely put them off their game and perhaps even poison the process a little bit. So I think it can help, particularly at the parts at the beginning of teaching this. Although by the time your dog is running past cones with it in their mouth, they're usually enjoying the holding process. And then I would rather mark the dog and let them spit it out and run to you for a treat for more speedy training rather than running in and fumbling with a dog that's running at you with something in his mouth. As we move further and further along the process, remember that by the end of each step, we should have linked together the other steps. Before moving on to turning, you should be getting a reliable pick up, carry, hold and give. So let's see this in action with Aya.
Good. 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 Right. Good. Good.
Turning and picking up. Towards the end of the session with Aya, you may have noticed that I started putting the item behind her before asking her onto it. Also, I'll do this in a corner so that she doesn't overshoot the toy. She practices nice tight turns, and to get her moving back towards me as a default and never practicing moving off in other directions. A separate exercise I might do to both proof the hold and to practice turns is a hold with an around a cone, if the dog knows that. So running out. Last but not least, this part of the process is one of my favourites, and it's running out and picking up the item. This is where speed, arousal and anticipation have to be high, which means I won't ever practice too many reps of that, particularly with a less motivated dog. And particularly if this process hasn't already become your dog's absolute favourite thing to do, although I hope it has. Sometimes with possessive dogs, ramping them up like this and ramping them up too high can begin to bring back that possessive behaviour. So I would practice it in a corner again and inside with short distances first. So you're going to hold your dog's harness or their collar. You're going to really ramp them up. You're going to throw the item for the dog out, and then you're going to let them go and mark the pickup first. At this point, don't be too hungry for the complete retrieve behaviour. I know it's tempting because you know it's there in the dog's brain, but speed and pickup is fine. So repeat this and then start using your cones again to start putting in the turn and carry behaviour. When you're getting a really fast and excited run out, pick up, turn and carry, only then tack on those more controlled elements of hold and give at the end. And never be scared to practice a bunch of just running out, grabbing, turning and carrying back to re-energise a dog that does find those control bits a bit boring. And ta-da, you have your retrieve. So watch our position and distraction type videos if you want to get your dog sitting and waiting when you throw the item out, if you want that more formal retrieve. But for active scent work retrieve, I would more likely hold the dog in a middle position and ramp him up so that I can get him out searching quickly. Good luck. And don't forget to subscribe by hitting the red button. And if you don't want to miss out on future tutorials like this one, ring my bell.